This is Captiva in Conversation, your space for impactful and psychologically safe dialogue. We turn internal discussions with our people into useful lessons for the wider world, all centred on your development and finding new ways to grow.
I'm delighted to be joined by my two wonderful colleagues, Heather and Aston, today. If you wouldn't mind just giving a brief introduction to yourselves, please. Thank you so much.
So my name's Heather. I'm the Additional Learning Support Mentor here at Captiva, and I work with people every single day who work a little bit differently, who need that additional support. And it's really shown me, I think in this role in particular, how important it is that workplaces are more adaptive to people and not the other way around. So I'm kind of bringing that perspective today.
I'm Aston Wood. I'm the head of youth work here at Captiva Learning. My job is to create and deliver the youth work program, our degree apprenticeship program that we have here. Topic is interesting for us because we have a lot of inclusion and diversity, or rather youth work has anti-discriminatory and anti-oppressive practice woven throughout the entire profession. So this is very relevant to our area of work, but also just relevant to everybody.
Completely agree, and really excited by you both being here today, and thank you so much for giving up your time and your expertise. And you know, the key themes today are around diversity and inclusion in modern workplaces, and really then thinking about how that resonates with global and individual differences across organisations. So I suppose the first question really is, what do we mean by diversity and inclusion at work? I'm going to come to you first, Heather, for your answer on that. Thank you.
I think for me, the key kind of caveat to this is, and this is something that I've learned really quickly in this role, is that diversity isn't always just what we can visually see. So we might think two people look the same, they come from the same cultural background, but then we need to take into account that the way that they think, the way that they learn, how they can approach problems can be completely different. So for me, that diversity is being really aware of the aspects that we can't see, being curious, asking questions, and then that inclusion for me is just making those small changes that make the biggest difference. It doesn't have to be a tick box exercise. It just needs to be, what do you need? Having that conversation with that person.
Amazing. Thank you, Heather. And Aston, same question to you. What do we mean by diversity inclusion at work?
Certainly, my approach to this is anti-oppression and anti-discrimination. Heather's right. We need to be doing all of those things within the workplace in order that we can model that for other people that need it. I would certainly imagine that, equality and diversity and inclusion is something that we learn. Like, we do need to be curious about this stuff all the time. We're never going to be able to account for all of it, but what we can do is have an open mind to how we can be more diverse and how we can be more inclusive. We also need to go further, and certainly one of the jobs of a youth worker in the youth work profession is to dismantle some of this. So for me, it really is about dismantling racism, ableism, sexism, classism, heteronormity, and making sure that we don't kind of sanitize this idea of diversity and inclusion to make it, perhaps a little bit more comfortable for us to talk about. Some of these things are a bit uncomfortable. So for me, it does all of those things that Heather does, and then also, especially for youth workers, kind of, puts it on steroids. We really go for it.
Amazing. And I'll go a step further with you there then, Aston. What should diversity look like in a real workplace?
And we kind of had this question come up a few times in our program. So, we're working with youth workers all across the country in lots of different settings. We've had some wonderful examples of people working in quite rural settings in small villages, and their biggest concern is around income disparity and trying to make sure that people have equal access to opportunities in areas that are both quite affluent, also at the same time have poverty in the same place. Less obvious, and that requires a little bit more thinking, a little bit more reflecting, a little bit more time spent looking into this really deeply. So what it looks like, really difficult to pin down, but that doesn't mean that we should stop thinking about it at any point. We do live in a society and within systems that in many instances are inherently unjust and unequal. So chances are we're around some of that all of the time. We just need to know how to find it.
That's really interesting. And you're doing an entire podcast around that very theme itself. From your perspective then, Heather, what are some common misconceptions about diversity? And actually, how can we as workplaces do what Aston's saying, actually, be more inclusive, not just in our practice, but in our thought process around that?
So I think to really kind of get to that, we need to understand what do we mean by that. So when we use the term, so neurodivergent, that's the term that we use to describe individuals who their brain works differently to what we would consider neurotypical. So those differences can impact the way somebody thinks, how they learn. It reflects that natural variation throughout life, that small differences in brain functions. And I think it's about playing to those people's strengths, being very aware. Lots of people who are neurodivergent will have strengths such as they might be able to spot those small details before anybody else, or they might be able to really zoom out on a situation and see it from a different perspective and spot something that is going to happen before it happens. That pattern recognition is insanely useful within work, and I think it's about ensuring that everybody has that knowledge, upskilling everybody to be aware of the needs of those people in the workplace, and also making sure that it is a safe space, that people feel like they can say, actually, this is tricky for me today, or this is not quite how I work. I actually need it to be really quiet. I prefer to have, really directive instructions, whereas somebody else might think, actually, if you allow me, just tell me what needs to be done, allow me to do it in a way that suits me, and I will be able to do that. So it's different, and it's getting to know whoever you are working with, taking, like we said before, that curiosity. It's not one size fits all. No two people are the same. So it's about that curiosity, getting to know what will support that individual and making those small changes for them.
Amazing, Heather. Thank you so much. And to sort of carry on with that point then, Aston, but from a slightly different angle, what do you think that colleagues, but also leaders, should be doing to create a more supportive environment?
It needs careful attention by senior leaders and by managers. I've always imagined that there's an expectation on those people to really be setting the scene. They're the ones that create the environment in which other people are able to flourish, and that needs careful attention, needs consideration, needs lots of reflection on what's going on. And I think sometimes maybe senior leaders could do with sitting a little bit more uncomfortably with some of these things rather than pretending that we've got a process in place, or we've written it in a policy, or there's been some guidance, or somebody's done some mandatory training on this, therefore it's fine. Like, sit with the discomfort. Like, I think one of the things that diversity really looks like is conflict. It's things not fitting together neatly. It's square pegs and round holes. Well, what's your response to that? Do you come along with just a big mallet, or do you start thinking about how things might change? And then who are you involving in those decisions? And that really speaks to Heather's point about people having agency to be able to determine for themselves what works really well. What they need to be successful. So I guess, part of it is about looking at actually what's going on, thinking about the tools that you have at your disposal, making sure that you're in a position where you can create environments that support flourishing, and giving away some of that control and power that you have within the workplace to other people so that they may arrive at their own solutions. And the chances are you'll find something different, something interesting that probably works for lots of other people as well.
Amazing. End of the podcast, not really, even though that's a brilliant sentence. And so we're coming on then to kind of that idea of identity, being a change agent, and that awareness, thinking about, respectful language and inclusion, and creating cultures of openness and respect. So I'll come to you again then, Heather. How can colleagues, people in general, be mindful of inclusive language and behaviours?
Yeah, with that, I think it is one of the most important things in that workspace. You spend the majority of your time throughout the week with your colleagues, And I think feeling safe within that space really impacts your confidence at work. I think it impacts your engagement, your well-being. So if someone feels like they have to kind of hide or mask parts of who they are, that can be so exhausting. It can limit their kind of contribution and their output. And also, coming from a kind of personal perspective of someone who is gay and also neurodivergent, there's times in the past when I've wondered, can I be open? Should I hold back? Is this person a safe person to give them a kind of peek into my personal life? Like, can I say my wife? And I know that that's not just my experience, and many people will feel that. So what I think the key is, it's creating that respectful environment, allowing people to feel that they can say what they need to say, that they're listened to, and they're not judged. And like Aston said, that comes from those people, that the managers, the leaders, it comes from them kind of carrying that baton to pass on to everybody that works there and setting that kind of ethos. And I know that we do lots of diversity and inclusion training, and I think that's so important to make sure people are aware of those language choices. There's lots of times when people will say to me, "Oh, your husband," or I've had it before, but even the postman said, "Is your husband in?" And it's really unsettling, because you're like, is this a safe person to say, actually, it's my wife, or not? And I think just having an awareness around that inclusive language it's a small little change for the person that's having that conversation, but who is hearing that, it's a massive, massive thing, because you don't feel safe in that moment. So that's the key, is just thinking about those language choices to make that other person feel safe.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Heather, genuinely. And if I could just probe a bit further then, in terms of them, we talk about kind of EDI training and CPD and things of that nature, doesn't necessarily always, ironically, include sentiments around language choices. So what would you advise for anyone that's listening here around their own organizational training and what it needs to include around that?
It's kind of having that ambiguous language, which I know sounds a little bit counterproductive, but just using the word partner, for example, and it fits everybody. It's a small little change, it fits everybody, it doesn't make anybody feel uncomfortable. So I think it's just about having that training around those language choices, and again, key buzzword, being curious. We have learners, who use gender neutral pronouns. Ask them, what are your pronouns? I think we need to get away from this. And it is a lot to do with the media, of this being scared of offending somebody or using the wrong term. And actually, nobody's offended it if it's a mistake. And if you say, "Oh, sorry, what are your pronouns?" Or, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realise." And that's fine. Nobody's perfect. It's not about holding anybody to ransom over their language choices. I think it's about owning it if you make a mistake. And again, asking the questions. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Nobody's perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you, Heather. And then on that kind of note then, Aston, what can we be doing as individuals to create that respectful workplace where inclusive cultures are part of everyday practice? What kind of advice and guidance would you give there?
Certainly the being curious is good, asking questions. And I think that also comes with, and this isn't something that necessarily sits easy with a lot of people or within a lot of organizations, is being prepared to be wrong, like to understand that you come with this ignorance to the world around you, and the only way that you're going to get less ignorant about stuff is by being prepared to make mistakes. It did remind me, Heather, as you were talking, we have these it's a question that we have as a job interview question for youth workers in our youth club, and also we've discussed it on the program as well, in terms of the responses that you get to a young person who's using discriminatory language. And there is a bit of judgment that needs to be made in those instances. And it really comes down to, for us anyway, and this is what we explore on the course, as to whether the young person is doing that, using that language with a deliberate intent to cause harm and offence, knowing exactly what the language is intended to do and why they're using it in this particular way? Or is it coming from a position of their own ignorance? This is something that they've heard. Perhaps this is the talk that happens around the dinner table. And now they're trying out this language within the youth club. There are no situations they're going to have different responses, and they should do. They should do. But that can only happen if the young person, and I think this is probably the same for us in the workplace as well, that can only happen if the young person is in a position where they feel safe to be wrong about something, and then to take the advice and the guidance, and see it modelled in the other people around them. Is how you might respond to that. So I guess there's a bit of judgment involved there in terms of how we deal with these kind of things, but also the first position has to be, I might not be wrong about this. And if we all do that together, then we can all be curious together. We can all make our mistakes. And if we do end up using, language which causes offence, we know that we're doing it from a position of, not quite being sure. And we're also happy to be corrected. We're grateful to be corrected because now we're slightly less ignorant than we were before.
So with my provocative hat on, Aston particularly, what
Mhm.
stops people from feeling safe to be wrong in workplaces?
Power, essentially, power over them. I think that there are a lot of places, certainly workplaces, that have systems of power and therefore systems of oppression already in place to maintain the status quo, to not upset things, to not introduce anything new. It's a question: who does it? Who does that serve? Who benefits from that? He benefits from having unquestioning, almost unconscious employees that will just rock up and do as they're told. So I think the thing that stops that from happening and the responsibilities of senior leaders to ensure the environment is good for flourishing.
And again, it's fascinating because it's that idea of flourishing and the traditional kind of concepts of that. Actually, flourishing and conflict, I would argue, go hand in hand, and that you can't have true innovation without that diverse melting pot of perspectives and ideas, experiences, backgrounds to really and genuinely create something unique and all encompassing. And the only way to do that is to have a diverse range of perspectives. And yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. What advice would you give to them around creating those environments, creating that sense of inclusion?
I think ultimately it comes down to just being kind, asking questions, getting to know people. And going back a little bit to what Aston said, building on that, I think as humans, we do not like to feel judged. So when you make a mistake, I think it's that fear of somebody perceiving you to have done something wrong. The majority of humans do not like to feel like they are in trouble. I don't think that ever really leaves you, even as an adult. You don't like to feel, and it is uncomfortable. And that's okay if you are then able to process that in a way that feels safe. So like Aston said, when you have that kind of oppressive, those forces from above, it feels a little bit icky, I would say, like, oh, uncomfortable. So I think it's about being kind, giving grace to others how you would like to receive grace if you make a mistake, and being observant, sitting back, taking it in, looking what's happening. How does this workplace operate? Who knows what? Who do I need to go to for advice? Who's my little safe space that I can speak to when I need to have a vent? So yeah, I would say be kind, observe, be curious, and also give people grace.
Love that. Anything you'd like to add there, Aston?
No, I think that was great.
Wonderful. So last question for you both then. For our listeners, a lot to ponder there and a lot to think about in terms of their own workplaces and their own kind of communities. The question for you first, Aston, is what small actions can they put in place to make a difference?
I think the key takeaway for me would be that yes, everything that we've discussed runs deep, and I think it all needs to be explored on a kind of deeper level, learning why language that you previously may have used can be degrading to some people. Taking it on the chin, thinking, okay, thank you, I've learned something new. And I think those small changes have the biggest impact. So diversity and inclusion, it exists everywhere. So it's not about the inclusion in itself, it's how we as individuals respond to it. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. It's that idea of awareness, isn't it? And action and
Yeah.
making sure that we are mindful of it. Thank you so much, Heather. Anything to add there, Aston, before we bring it to a close?
Yeah, I find the question a little bit difficult. Small actions do matter. They don't substitute for structural change. It reminds me a little bit of the when all of our cotton buds switched from plastic to paper because that was meant to save the planet. Well, it's been like that for a while now, and it doesn't seem to have made that much difference. Getting a suggestion from management that we should have pronouns in our bios is great. Yeah, but that doesn't replace things like pay equity in the workplace. And small actions can go towards building a better culture in the workplace, but we need to be wary that we don't make these like individual issues. It's very much about being in a collective. Diversity and inclusion isn't a personal value. It's something or personal virtue. It's something that requires a collective response from all of us, kind of playing together. That's how we make the change. I guess I'm a bit of a believer, and this is something that we advise on the youth work program as well. That why we're thinking about these things, normally in respect to young people and youth work. We do need to account for our own positionality within these things. So I guess one of the small things that you can do, which is really helpful, is injustice. If that has made you feel uncomfortable, then spend some time with it. Like sit with it to try and understand why. Really reflect on why that's made you uncomfortable. And that's not necessarily to make you feel guilty, because the chances are there was something else that is attributed to why you get this little pang of guilt when somebody might be talking about things like white privilege in a meeting. Like think about the things that have gone on before you, the systems around you that lead you to feel that way. So I guess the small thing that you could do is to sit with it and reflect on it.
Love that. Thank you. What a way to end. So just like to say a huge thank you to both yourself, Heather, and Aston, for sharing your experiences and perspectives throughout this entire conversation. I think, this episode more than any has really highlighted how diversity in all its forms, background, identity, ways of thinking, global perspective really can add value to the workplace when it's supported by genuine inclusion. Today, we've really unpicked that idea of understanding and curiosity, as well as the skills needed, maybe at systemic level, to create collaborative cultures effectively across our organizations. So it's not a one-time effort. It should be an ongoing commitment to awareness, respect, and action, and actually being really thoughtful in the changes in how we communicate and work together. Huge thank you to both of you. Absolutely fascinating session. Massively appreciated, as I'm sure our listeners will accrue to. So thank you so much, and I will stop the recording there.